This is Rick Tobin, welcoming all my followers of Destiny Echoes onto these stories of paranormal New Mexico. Yep, that photo is actually me some 35 years ago. I had the dust of pioneers flowing through me, the risk takers. I did a lot of treasure hunting and paranormal investigating in the 80s and 90s, especially in New Mexico. This is one of several shows about those true events and adventures in the land of enchantment when I visited or lived there. Now's the time for me to tell my paranormal tales of the Old West, my Old West, before the rest of me got so old. Again, these stories are true, with no glorification. There's no need. I walked into these things all the time whenever I traveled. It's time to share them, as these things will become more common every day as dimensions collide, as we discuss here on Destiny Echoes. Today's story is about Cloudcroft and the ghost of the Cloudcroft Lodge. Let me explain for a moment about New Mexico for those of you who aren't familiar with the southwestern U.S. It's smack dab between Texas and Arizona, topped by Colorado, a long way from California on the west coast. The location of today's story is New Mexico, in the center of the Lincoln National Forest, in the southwest part of the state, just south of the Mescalero Apache Reservation. Oh, and you might notice, too, that White Sands Testing Grounds is to the west of that region. That day in May 1990, I took Highway 285 north on my way from Carlsbad, where I was working at the time, in the south, to check out the saucer crash site I'd read so much about in Roswell. My intention was to take a short trip, a jaunt over to see the beautiful Sacramento Mountain Country, past May Hill, on Highway 82 West. So I took that left-hand turn off at 285 and took it up to the mountains. I wanted to check out the verdant forest I'd heard about and to visit the supposedly haunted Cloudcroft Lodge. The stories I heard were true. The countryside was rugged and beautiful as I drove through the mountain passes, incredibly forested. Those who think New Mexico is just desert have truly underestimated the beauty it holds. I finally reached the rustic village of Cloudcroft. It's definitely a Western motif, but, I'm in a hurry. I went up to the lodge, and I wasn't going to take a lot of time in town as a tourist. After a short jog, I faced the Cloudcroft Lodge. To my amazement, it just seemed out of place. It looked like an elaborate Bavarian hotel in the middle of a federal forest. It was enchanting, with its old-world styling topped by a copper-tipped tower far above the main building roof. I understand it was constructed supposedly so arriving trains could be detected long before arriving in the area. We go back a ways. In 1899, the Eddy brothers were building a railroad in the area and founded Cloudcroft, which means a field of clouds. And they built the Cloudcroft Lodge. It has had a storied history with many famous and wealthy visiting celebrities such as Judy Garland, Gilbert Rowland, Clark Gable, Pancho Villa, Mark Coppola, Neil Patrick Harris, and Ronnie Cox, to name just a few. I was told also that some national politicians stayed for short periods, and how true that turned out to be. The ghostly legend got to me, as I was a sucker for a great haunting story, and I couldn't ignore the details of the lovely redhead wraith named Rebecca. The story goes that a chambermaid there in the early 1930s disappeared from her quarters after her lumberjack lover caught her with another man. Oh, those frivolous redheads. Naughty Rebecca. Supposedly, she has been appearing and disappearing at the lodge ever since, perhaps seeking a new lover, according to local yarns. Based on my previous experience with spirits locked into a location, they usually are typically not seeking a new date. They're usually troubled and in pain, lost from their proper movement to the next level of spiritual development. Anyway, I parked, walked leisurely into the lodge restaurant, sat for a light lunch. As it also let me interrogate the waitress about all the pictures of Rebecca in the restaurant and explain to me the write-ups they provided on the table about the whole story. She told me lots of things about what the staff and visitors had seen, the elevators working by themselves, apparitions, object movings, etc. Typical haunting type stuff. I asked her if I could meet the hotel manager. She gave me the name, and I proceeded to meet him. The guy was on duty for the day. Of course, it's the weekend, so it wasn't too busy. He seemed fair-minded as I explained my interest, and then was daring enough to explain some of my psychic abilities to him. He scoffed a bit and said, My kind had been in before to check out the haunting. He wasn't too impressed by them, feeling most of the stories were for drawing customers, and I wasn't one, and I was just one of those freaky psychic people. He said he might grant me access to the tower and cupola area after we did a little walk-through to evaluate what I might feel about the place. I guess he was still curious. We proceeded down a long hallway, past the stairs, towards the kitchens. I stopped him abruptly, telling him to hold for a moment. I could see the outline of a young man on the floor with early 20th century garb and wearing a handlebar mustache. He stopped and laughed. He asked where I was from and if I knew anything about the lodge entertainment. This put me off a bit. No, I stressed, I'm from California and I'm just visiting. I'd never been in the area before. Why are you asking me about this? He then told me that the week before they had the Mystery Theater at the lodge. I didn't know what a mystery theater was. He explained that the guests dressed in period pieces and tried to solve a new murder mystery each year. The week before, the actor who played the murder victim had lain at the very spot I pointed out. I guess that convinced him maybe I wasn't a fake. The manager shook his head and agreed that maybe I could go on and check some other areas out. He provided me a key to the locked tower, which I had asked for, but advised me to take my own time and chances going upstairs since we were at a higher altitude and I'd been living down at a lower level. It might be a little bit tiring for me. He also filled me in on many of the famous politicians who had stayed, and what a nasty lot many of them were, according to him. I was not surprised. He left me at the bottom of the first flight of stairs and I ascended. As I got to one of the landings, and I won't say which one, I encountered a multi-layered scene I won't soon forget. It was like a holograph laid on top of each other of different characters and so forth, mixed in the past of well-known famous personalities doing the big dirty with their paramours right there on the landing. It was a shock and, to be blunt, nasty. I guess such dangerous public forays were the delight of the high and mighty. There are times when you just don't want to step on the ectoplasm, and I'll leave it at that. I continued on, hoping I wouldn't see the likes of that again. Soon I was in the tower, the sight that had drawn me from the parking lot. It was usually restricted. I used the manager's key, went inside, and the inside was a fascinating octagon with a high-topped copper cap. A circle of upper windows way above me were just below the cap and sealed. Those at my level that went around the room were latched and could be opened inward. I opened one and sat next to it by a single small round table, and there was some cool air drifting in, just enough to cool the heat rising from the hotel below. Otherwise, it was really uncomfortable in that tower. The view was spectacular. As promised, I could see the resplendent white sands area far to the west over the hills and valleys of forest land. Oddly enough, there were no bird songs. That seemed a bit strange, but then I heard other sounds, like a trailing bit of music and light laughter. Was I hearing with clairaudience? It made no sense that members of past gaiety would remain to haunt. This was supposed to be Rebecca again, who was sad and unhappy. I investigated. I found the wires around the base of one of the windows. It led to a speaker that was not very carefully hidden, just outside the windows. A stunt, I thought, to give the sense of a haunting. As I looked down, I could see a wedding party enjoying their celebration that was probably picked up by a remote microphone and piped up to that speaker. That was really disappointing and clearly poorly orchestrated hoax to fool the weak of mind. I remember letting out a heavy sigh, so disappointed on taking a distracting side trip to only find some lascivious imprints left on a stairwell. I sat again, calling on the spirit of Rebecca if she really was there, and I waited quietly, not expecting much. It was still for a time, except for the piped-in music, till suddenly a gust hit the tower in a blast. Every one of the latched windows at that level flew open violently. It was like being in one of New Mexico's amazing dust devils. Everything loose in the room began spinning and twirling upward in a tornado of loose trash. For many, this would be a Pampers moment, but not for me. Now, I come to life in these encounters. I'd seen some like this before in exorcisms. Now was the time to open the tunnel to the other side. I called on Azrael to open the pathway and then called upon the disturbed spirits to go with the archangel to a place of light and peace. The whirling stopped, the wind stilled, there was silence, even from the speaker. I looked down. I guess the wedding party felt the tempest blast as well. They were still. I could sense the peace restored. It was time to leave. I closed the windows back up. I returned the key to the manager when I got downstairs, and he asked if I had detected anything. Well, I lied, and I told him no. Why ruin the legend? They obviously didn't believe in it anyway, and it was time for me to go home. No going on to Roswell. That wasn't just not going to happen. I never did make it there before I moved from Carlsbad a month later. Cloudcroft that day was enough paranormal for a lifetime. All I can say now is, may you rest in peace, Rebecca. Thanks for going to a place of rest. Thanks for joining us here at Destiny Echoes. If you'd like to find out more about Destiny Echoes, go to our Buzzsprout site. Here's the URL, and we look forward to your joining us at Destiny Echoes.